You are pursuing the wrong pleasures. Not because pleasure is wrong. Epicurus would be the last person to say pleasure is wrong, because the culture you live in has so thoroughly confused pleasure with stimulation, gratification with satisfaction, the momentary hit with the durable good, that the pursuit of pleasure has become one of the primary sources of the suffering it was supposed to relieve. The philosophy of Epicurus, which has been systematically misrepresented since antiquity, which his enemies caricatured as a license for debauchery, which every subsequent century has managed to misread in some specifically contemporary way, is the most precise analysis of pleasure and its relationship to the good life that Western philosophy produced. And its central claim is a paradox that is simultaneously obvious and almost impossible to hold in practice. The path to pleasure is not the pursuit of pleasure. The things that produce the deepest, most durable, most genuinely satisfying quality of the good life are not the things the word pleasure suggests. They are friendship, freedom from anxiety, the examined life, the tranquility of the person who has understood what they actually need and has stopped chasing what they do not. The Epicurean good life is quiet, simple, and, when properly understood, the most radically countercultural philosophy of happiness available. He lived it. In a garden in Athens with a community of friends that included women and enslaved people at a time when neither group was typically included in philosophical life. He ate bread and water. He was happy. There is a specific dissatisfaction that the culture of consumption produces that it cannot acknowledge without undermining itself. The person who has everything available and is still not satisfied, not dramatically dissatisfied, not in crisis, not in collapse, the low-grade, persistent, entirely predictable dissatisfaction of the person whose pleasure has been organized around the next acquisition, the next experience, the next hit of novelty, and who keeps discovering that the acquisition and the experience and the novelty produce shorter and shorter intervals of genuine satisfaction before the wanting starts again. This is not a failure of character. It is the predictable consequence of confusing two things that Epicurus carefully distinguished: kinetic pleasures and katastematic pleasures. The kinetic pleasures are the pleasures of active stimulation, the good meal while it is being eaten, the entertainment while it is playing, the acquisition at the moment of getting. These are real pleasures. They are also, by their nature, temporary. When the meal ends, the pleasure ends. When the entertainment stops, the pleasure stops. The wanting returns. The katastematic pleasures are the pleasures of a stable state, the condition of a person who has what they need, who is free from anxiety, who is embedded in genuine friendship, who has cultivated the kind of understanding that prevents unnecessary suffering. These pleasures are not as vivid as the kinetic ones. They do not produce the spike. They produce something more valuable and far harder to achieve, the durable, background quality of a life that is going well, not the peak, the ground. Most people are pursuing peaks and neglecting the ground. Epicurus spent his life arguing that this is backwards and describing in practical detail what the ground actually requires. Epicurus was born in 341 BC on the island of Samos, the son of an Athenian colonist. He studied philosophy in Athens and eventually founded his own school, the Garden, in Athens around 306 BC. The school was named for what it was, a garden, a physical space in which Epicurus and his students and friends lived communally, studied philosophy, and practiced the life they were theorizing. The garden was famous in antiquity for its inclusion. Epicurus welcomed women as students and full participants in philosophical life, extraordinary in the 4th century BC. He welcomed enslaved people. He welcomed people of all social standings. Philosophy, in his view, was not a privilege of the well-born. It was the primary instrument of the good life, and the good life was available to everyone, regardless of circumstance. His community attracted immediate hostility from the Stoics, from the Platonists, from the cultural guardians who found the inclusion of women and enslaved people philosophically suspicious and his doctrine of pleasure ethically dangerous. The hostile accounts depicted Epicurean philosophy as an excuse for self-indulgence, the philosopher and his students wallowing in gratification. The surviving fragments of Epicurus's actual letters and writings tell a completely different story. He suffered from serious physical illness for much of his life, kidney stones probably, in addition to other conditions. His famous letter to his friend Idomeneus, written on the day of his death, describes himself as suffering physical pain while simultaneously experiencing the joy of his philosophical memories and friendships. He was, by any reasonable reading of the evidence, a person who actually practiced what he taught, and who found in the practice exactly what he promised. Not the absence of suffering, but the kind of life in which suffering does not overwhelm the fundamental quality of the living. He died in 270 BC at approximately 71, after writing a letter that has become one of the most cited documents in the history of philosophy. His philosophy was enormously influential in antiquity. Lucretius built the great Epicurean poem De Rerum Natura on his foundations. It was substantially suppressed in the Christian centuries as incompatible with the afterlife-oriented framework of medieval theology. It was recovered by Pierre Gassendi in the 17th century and fed into the modern scientific worldview through Lucretius's influence on Galileo and Newton. Thomas Jefferson was an Epicurean. The Declaration of Independence's phrase, "the pursuit of happiness," carries Epicurean freight that most people who quote it do not know is there. The philosophy, the distinctions that, held clearly, change the relationship to pleasure and to the good life. The first and most fundamental distinction is between kinetic and katastematic pleasure, which we have touched on but need to develop. Kinetic pleasures are pleasures of motion, eating, sex, intellectual stimulation, sensory experience. They require active engagement, and they end when the engagement ends. Katastematic pleasures are pleasures of rest, the absence of pain in the body, Aponia, the absence of disturbance in the mind, Ataraxia. These are not the absence of experience, they are the positive condition of the person who has organized their life in such a way that neither body nor mind is in a state of unnecessary distress. Epicurus argues that the katastematic pleasures are the foundation, and that the kinetic pleasures are valuable additions to a good foundation, but that the kinetic pleasures pursued on a poor foundation do not produce the satisfaction they promise. The rich meal eaten in anxiety is not as pleasant as the simple meal eaten in peace. The expensive entertainment consumed by the person who is disturbed in mind does not produce the satisfaction that the simple enjoyment of good company produces in the person who is free from unnecessary disturbance. The second distinction is between natural and necessary, natural and unnecessary, and unnatural desires. Natural and necessary desires, food, shelter, clothing, basic human connection, are easily satisfied and produce genuine satisfaction when met. Natural but unnecessary desires, the desire for specific food rather than food generally, the desire for a particular kind of company, are fine to pursue when available and easily foregone when not. Unnatural and unnecessary desires, the desire for fame, unlimited wealth, the competitive acquisition of status symbols, are by their nature insatiable. They cannot be satisfied because their satisfaction is defined by what others have, and the reference point always moves. The person who has organized their life around the natural and necessary has organized their life around what can be satisfied. The person who has organized their life around the unnatural and unnecessary has organized their life around what cannot. Third, and most important, philosophy itself is the medicine. Epicurus was explicit about this. The philosophy is not a set of ideas about the good life. It is the practice, the daily disciplined cultivation of the understanding that prevents unnecessary suffering.
the understanding of death that removes the fear of death, the understanding of the gods that removes the fear of divine punishment, the understanding of pleasure and pain that prevents the pursuit of pleasures that produce more pain than pleasure, and the avoidance of pains that, endured briefly, produce more pleasure than avoiding them costs.
He gave this the name of the Tetrapharmakos, the four-part remedy. Don't fear God, don't fear death. What is good is easy to get. What is terrible is easy to endure. This is not a bumper sticker. It is the compressed form of a complete philosophical therapy for the anxiety that prevents the simple, available, genuinely satisfying good life from being actually lived. Now the bridge. Because Epicurus was a 4th century BC Greek philosopher working within the specific context of Hellenistic philosophy and the specific anxieties of the ancient world. But here is what translates directly. The kinetic pleasure culture you are living in, the scroll that produces a hit and leaves you wanting another scroll, the purchase that satisfies briefly and leaves you wanting another purchase, the achievement that produces relief and leaves you wanting another achievement, the entire machinery of the modern economy organized around the stimulation of the kinetic pleasures, while the Katastematic foundation, the Aponia and the Ataraxia, the freedom from bodily distress and mental disturbance, is systematically neglected. Epicurus is not asking you to live on bread and water. He is asking you to notice what is actually producing the quality of your life at the foundational level. Whether the kinetic pleasures you are pursuing are being pursued on a foundation that can support genuine satisfaction, or whether the foundation has been neglected in the pursuit of the peaks, and whether the peaks, arrived at on a poor foundation, are delivering what they promise. The friendship, the simplicity, the philosophical understanding that prevents the unnecessary suffering, the garden. These are not consolation prizes for the person who cannot afford the kinetic pleasures. They are, in Epicurus's precise and extensively argued view, the actual goods, the things that the durable good life is actually made of. Here is what Epicurus asks of you today. First, audit the foundation, not the peaks, the ground, the Aponia, freedom from unnecessary physical distress. Are you sleeping enough? Are you in a body that is being adequately cared for, not optimized, adequately cared for in the basic Epicurean sense of the person who is not neglecting the elementary needs in the pursuit of the kinetic experiences that cannot compensate for their absence? And the Ataraxia, freedom from unnecessary mental disturbance. What anxieties are you carrying that are unnecessary in the Epicurean sense, that are not produced by genuine, present, addressable threats, but by the fear of death, the fear of social judgment, the insatiable desire for what cannot be satisfied? Not asking you to eliminate all anxiety, asking you to distinguish the necessary from the unnecessary and to apply the philosophical medicine to the unnecessary kind.
Second, classify your current desires. 1 day of honest accounting in the Epicurean framework. Natural and necessary, natural and unnecessary, unnatural and unnecessary. Where is the greatest dissatisfaction coming from? The natural and necessary desires, reliably satisfiable and not currently being met? Or the unnatural and unnecessary, reliably insatiable and receiving the most attention? The audit does not require asceticism, it requires honesty. The person who can see clearly which desires are producing satisfaction and which are producing the wanting that precedes another round of wanting has done the primary Epicurean philosophical work. Third, invest in one genuine friendship. Epicurus said, of all the things that wisdom acquires for the happiness of life, the greatest by far is friendship. Not the network, not the social media following, not the professional relationship maintained for its utility. The specific, genuine, mutually interested, honest, and affectionate friendship that produces, in its presence, the specific quality of the katastematic good that nothing else produces. One friendship in your current life that deserves more investment than it is currently receiving. One conversation that has been deferred. One honest engagement that has been managed into the safer form. The Epicurean practice of friendship is not the performance of connection. It is the specific, costly, entirely worth it investment in the relationship that produces the foundational good that the kinetic pleasures cannot substitute for. Fourth, apply the Tetrapharmakos to one current anxiety. Don't fear God. Don't fear death. What is good is easy to get. What is terrible is easy to endure. Take the current anxiety, the one that is sitting in the background of the day, and run it through the Epicurean medicine. Is this anxiety about death, directly or indirectly? Is it about divine punishment or social judgment? Is it about the scarcity of something that is, on examination, genuinely available, or about the inability to endure something that, on examination, is genuinely endurable? Not to eliminate the anxiety by philosophical argument in a single sitting, to bring the philosophical medicine to the anxiety and find out how much of it is necessary, produced by genuine, present, unaddressable threat, and how much of it is the unnecessary kind that the Epicurean practice is specifically designed to treat. I want to close with the letter Epicurus wrote to his friend Idomeneus on the last day of his life, while suffering what he called the blessed day of his death, while in real physical pain. I write this to you on a happy and also last day of my life. For strangery has attacked me, and also a dysentery, so violent that nothing can be added to the violence of my sufferings. But the cheerfulness of my mind, which comes from the recollection of all my philosophical contemplations, counterbalances all these afflictions. The kinetic pleasures were unavailable. He was dying in pain. What was available was the katastematic foundation, the philosophical understanding, the friendships, the memories of the examined and well-lived life that he had spent decades cultivating. And what was available was sufficient, not pleasant. Sufficient. That is the Epicurean promise, not the elimination of suffering. He never promised that. The specific, philosophically cultivated, genuinely available quality of a life that has been organized around the actual goods, such that when the kinetic pleasures are stripped away by illness, by loss, by the ordinary attritions of a life fully lived, what remains is still, in the Epicurean sense, good. The foundation holds, even in the dying, because the foundation was built from what actually holds, rather than from what the culture promised would hold and did not. Here is the question Epicurus leaves us with today. Of the pleasures you are currently pursuing, the kinetic and the katastematic, the insatiable and the genuinely satisfying, where is the greatest gap between what you are investing and what you are receiving? And what would it mean to invest differently? Not dramatically, one friendship tended, one unnecessary anxiety treated with the philosophical medicine, one desire recognized as unnatural and insatiable and released from the center of the life's energy. The garden is available. The bread and the water and the company of genuine friends and the philosophical understanding that prevents unnecessary suffering, these are not aspirational goods for a different kind of life. They are available in the life that is actually here. Leave that in the comments, because naming the foundational good you have been neglecting in the pursuit of the kinetic peak is the beginning of the Epicurean practice, the practice that has been misunderstood for 2,000 years, and that is, once understood, the most practically available philosophy of happiness that the Western tradition produced. I'll see you in the next one.